Hi, I'm the robot. She's the monster. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 22 of season 5, and we are continuing our Summer of Kaiju with a newer take on the genre, the 2016 film Colossal.
So we're talking about Colossal today, the 2016 film, as Mel said. I'm going to give you a little bit of background with the film. It was written and directed by Nacho Vigalondo, who, when I looked him up on IMDb, it looked like he had done a few kind of things in the horror genre. Two stood out to me that I had seen, and those were he had done short bits for anthology films, so VHS, Viral, and ABCs of Death. I honestly do not remember which ones were his, so I apologize about that, but I remember watching those. The movie is starring Anne Hathaway as the main character, Gloria, and Jason Sudeikis as Oscar. Now, I've seen this film before. This was my second time watching it, and this was the first time I saw it was close to when it came out. This time, obviously it was in 2021, which is post Ted Lasso, and it was hard for me to see Ted Lasso in this film because he's just such a mean person at times, for a lot of it, actually. The tagline for the movie, which I just kind of wanted to point out, was "There's a monster in all of us," which I liked. And just a little bit of trivia to get us started before I kind of throw it to Matt and Mel, because I'm really curious to hear what they thought of the film. But prior to the start of filming this, Toho Studios, who we've been talking about in previous episodes, because the summer series is all about kaiju. So of course we've been talking about Toho and Godzilla and Mothra. But they actually brought a lawsuit against Vigalondo and Voltage Pictures, the film's producers, for unauthorized usage of Godzilla's image. Now, Vigalondo, when he wanted to make this movie, he wanted to make a different type of kaiju movie. He was a fan of the movies in the past, and he wanted to kind of do his own take on the film, of those kind of films, but he wanted it to have the visual look of something that would fit into the tradition of the movies that he loved. So he originally, at least from interviews I've seen, wanted to do a kind of giant lizard that was Gloria's counterpart in this movie. But I guess somehow Toho got wind of it, and I believe it actually made it to court. Maybe it settled out of court. I can't remember now. But in the settlement of it, Vigalondo and Voltage Pictures basically had to say that they would not use anything that looked remotely like Godzilla. I did not know this until I watched this movie again recently, because that was one of my only things that really stood out to me in this film, is I couldn't understand why Gloria's kaiju looked like this weird walking tree man. And he's got kind of almost these, like, they're not quite horns, but like the bottom half of a triangle on his head. He looked strange to me. I'll just go ahead and say that. But that's why, because they were very conscious of trying to stay away from the Godzilla look. And they obviously couldn't do anything that was even remotely close to a lizard, but they wanted to pay tribute to that tradition. So it had to look like it would fit in that tradition, but not look anything like anything that Toho had done before. So I found that really interesting this time. But of course, Oscar's kaiju was a mech. So they had a little bit more wiggle room in how they did that, because you can make robots, I guess, look different enough. But anyway, I thought that was pretty fascinating, that this film not only, is a kind of contemporary update on the kaiju films and traditions, but it also has a real connection to Toho Studios, which began this whole thing. So I think that's enough of me kind of dropping some trivia here. I'm really curious. I know I like this film a whole lot. I liked it even better the second time. But I'm curious, Matt and Mel, what you thought, and if you've even seen this movie before, because I don't think we've ever talked about it.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. I had not seen this movie before. I think I was aware of it vaguely, but I mean, looking it up when I think it was you, Lisa, that pitched it as the topic for this episode when we were kind of brainstorming episodes. And so I looked it up on IMDb and said, well, I thought I'd heard of this, but I didn't realize that Anne Hathaway was in it. I didn't realize Jason Sudeikis was in it. So when I did actually sit down to watch it, I had never seen it, and I liked it. I think, and maybe this was because I glanced at IMDb. I had it under the impression they kind of described it as a comedy, and I guess I had it in my head that it was going to be kind of a romantic comedy. I don't know where I got that, but I was definitely wrong. I won't do any spoilers, at least at this time while we're talking about it, but it definitely was not a romantic comedy. It did have comedic moments and definitely some very funny moments, but I finished the movie and said, well, that wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But ultimately, I mean, I think I really liked it. I really liked what they did with it, and I liked kind of, well, I just liked the idea of it, of these people that were kind of controlling these monsters, and I don't know how else to describe it for those of you that haven't seen it yet. You may want to pause and actually watch the movie, because I'm sure we will have some spoilers. We'll probably try to mention when we're going to spoiler it as well, but yeah, the whole premise of it was really interesting and did some really cool stuff. And I agree, it was hard to watch Jason Sudeikis in this role. He had some very Ted Lasso-like moments where you could see the same sort of character coming through, and then there were other moments where he was very not Ted Lasso. And like you said, Lisa, he was a very mean person at a lot of points in this, and it was definitely weird being a big fan of Ted Lasso and eagerly awaiting the second season. But that's neither here nor there. I'll be quiet now and let Mel chime in on kind of her first thoughts.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, Matt. I had not seen this movie before. This was my first time watching it. And I'm pretty sure that when Lisa suggested we watch it, I had to look it up because it didn't ring a bell. And even looking it up, it didn't really, I think I must have just missed this in 2016 when it came out. I'm not sure how, because I think I would have noticed this, but I was very much interested. I read a short description, kind of like you did, and the movie was a lot. I don't know. I was kind of anticipating almost like a indie drama comedy type feel, that there might be some darkness, that it wasn't just going to be like straight up comedy. But it went to way darker places than I thought it was going to. And yeah, I have not watched Ted Lasso, though I've heard a lot of great things about it. But seeing Jason Sudeikis as a pretty mean and abusive character, which was I saw signs of that at the beginning of the movie before the kind of twist when it becomes really clear, and that kind of like, oh, this movie's gonna be a little bit more complicated than I think I thought it was. I do think you have to kind of get over the fact that it's got some almost like magical aspects to it. Like they explain in quotation marks like what's going on, like how they're connected to the kaiju, but you just have to go with it. I think if you think about that too much, you kind of miss the conceit or the metaphor of the movie. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was an interesting move to focus on these characters with these particular issues. Anne Hathaway's character was kind of unlikable at the beginning, but she grew on me. But I mean, she has human flaws, weaknesses. She's trying to get her life back together. And then you see her in some ways like the connection to the monster, while funny at first with some of the gestures that the monster was doing at the same time as her, you could also see her kind of starting to come to terms with just how big of a mess she had let her life get through the metaphor of the monster and the damage it was doing. And I thought that that was really fascinating. And I mean, we're going to spoil the heck out of this, I'm sure, in the episode, but I appreciated the ending when she kind of got to use the monster to stand up for herself in a really interesting way. I knew that the kaiju was involved. I had no idea the mecha aspect was involved. So that kind of shocked me when it happened. I know, I was really intrigued by it. And I'm glad I watched it for the first time while we're doing this, because I feel like the way we're setting this up is we're seeing kind of the history of the genre, but also seeing how it's been used later. So I thought that this was a really cool way of placing it kind of next to what we talked about with the original Godzilla and the original Mothra. So thank you for suggesting it, Lisa. If you hadn't mentioned it, I might never have watched this.
Yeah, I'm glad we watched it. And I just have to say, Mel, that I am personally shocked you have not watched Ted Lasso. That is unacceptable.
Agreed.
I don't have Apple TV, so
it is
I don't
worth
watch
it.
their shows. Okay.
You know, I was hesitant. I will say this, and this will be the last thing we say about Ted Lasso, hopefully. But yeah, I was hesitant to get Apple TV because I was like, I have every streamer possible. I don't need another one. And I kept telling myself, like, you do not need another one. That's the whole reason, like, we cut cable, is because we didn't want to spend any more money. And then here I am just adding streamers to streamers. I think Apple TV is worth it because Ted Lasso is excellent. Servant is an excellent show. So there are a few shows on there that are completely worth having it. But Ted Lasso is just one of those shows that I was like, there is no way this is going to be good, because it's a sports ball show, which you know how I feel about sports ball shows. I don't like them. And this was based on characters that were created in a commercial. And I was like, that sounds like it's going to be a disaster. And the show is wonderful. So yeah, you have to do it for yourself.
Yeah. Also, just as a side note, Mel, it's like $4.99 a month. Pay for 1 month. There's 10 episodes. It's worth the $5. But anyway, enough about trying to get you on the Ted Lasso train.
I will think more about my aversion to getting more streaming services.
Yeah, this is turning into a commercial for Apple TV, but do it. And Matt, it's funny that you said, for some reason both of you, I think, kind of weren't sure what to expect with this film. I was the same way when I watched it for the first time, because I remember seeing commercials for it and thinking, oh, it's Anne Hathaway with a giant tree monster behind her. I didn't even connect it to like the kaiju tradition until I watched the film for the first time. And I was like, oh, this is really fascinating. This is really interesting what they're doing. And when I went back after watching it a second time and I looked up some of the things that were being said about it early on, like right when it first came out, it was being billed as genre bending was thrown out a whole lot. But that term really doesn't mean much to me, because people apply that to almost everything. It's like, oh, it's genre bending. But they were calling it like a mashup of drama, romantic comedy, and like the kaiju tradition, which I thought was really interesting, because I think it maybe gave potential viewers the wrong idea about the film going in, or maybe just turned them off before they ever even watched it, because to me, that's not a very good description of what it is. I don't know how I would describe it. I guess we should just go ahead at this point, since we've kind of danced around it, and we're going to say this is going to be our blanket spoiler warning. We're about to talk about the entire film. I'll go ahead and kind of give a rundown of the film, kind of a plot summary, and then we can dive in to what we liked about it, maybe some of the themes, what it's doing interesting, that sort of thing. So the film opens with Gloria, and we see her coming in. She's coming in, it's early one morning, she's obviously been like out late, drinking, partying, whatever you want to say. And it's clear that it's a pattern with her. Her boyfriend, Tim, is there, and he's very upset. He's played by Dan Stevens, by the way, who was really wasn't he in that movie, The Guest? Because I really liked that. Anyway, he breaks up with her kind of on the spot, tells her to pack her things. She has to move out. And so this is kind of the inciting incident for her to go home and take care of herself and her life. But we get a sense right away that things are not okay with her beyond just the initial story problems. Because for one thing, she goes back home to her empty parents' house. And there's this sense that she can stay with her parents and kind of return home, but there's really no connection with her parents. There's nobody's there. She has really no connection to her hometown anymore. So you just get a sense that there's more going on with her than just her boyfriend broke up with her because she's been out too late at night. Almost immediately when she returns home, she meets up with Oscar. And we get the sense, again, that he's really the only person she knows in town anymore. He owns his dad's bar. He's dealing with his own sense of trauma. We learned very early on that both of his parents have passed away, and now he's kind of running the family business. But things don't quite seem right. But basically with Gloria and Oscar, we get this sense that, I don't know, there may be a budding kind of friendship or romance. So maybe that's where people were pulling the romantic comedy from. I honestly don't know. But it introduces this idea that Gloria is connected to this kaiju monster, which she figures out after a night with Oscar at his bar. She gets drunk. She comes home. She wakes up. She doesn't really know what's been going on. But when she wakes up, she finds out that there has been this giant monster that has appeared in Seoul, Korea. She sees it on the news, and it has been destructive and then disappeared. And she is immediately horrified about what happened. And we get the sense that things, again, are not quite happening, not quite okay with her. She's had problems with her memory, more than just, I think, getting blackout drunk. But she becomes kind of obsessed with the monster attacking Seoul. And she starts putting things together rather quickly. For one thing, it always happens at the same time in Seoul. It occurs, I think, early in the morning. 8:05 is, I think, what they say in the movie, local time for Oscar and Gloria. And it's always when she's at the same place. So there's a particular park in her town that she walks through that if she's there at that time, she figures out she can make the monster appear. So at this point, she's began to work at Oscar's bar, which, you know, is probably not the greatest thing for a recovering alcoholic trying to get her life together, but that's where she is. It's really the only connection she has to her town. She tells her friends about the connection to the kaiju. And this gets us up to kind of the big twist, I think, in the movie, is when she shows her friends what happens, she realizes that Oscar also shows up in Seoul as a mech. So she shows up in Seoul as a kaiju, he shows up as a mech. And this is when the movie really takes, I think, kind of the dark twist. Maybe this is what people are calling genre bending, I'm not sure. But what we thought may be kind of a budding indie romantic comedy turns into something much darker, because Gloria starts having problems with the idea that she might be causing destruction. In fact, there's a scene in which she trips while she's a kaiju, and she panics because she thinks she might have killed a lot of people, which she does. And this is terrible for her, but Oscar doesn't seem to have that same problem. Like, he thinks it's all fun and games. And So she tries to get him to stop. There's a brief kaiju fight between the two of them. It's interspersed between like their real life fight in the park. And then you kind of see on the news the kaiju and the mech fighting in Seoul and people watching. So all of this is happening. But as she starts trying to pull away from Oscar, he starts trying to get more and more control over her. And this is when, again, the movie takes a really, really dark turn where he starts using really psychological manipulation against Gloria to control her and to get her to do what he wants her to do. And it ends up kind of in a final fight scene. And he basically says that if she ever leaves, it's gonna, this is gonna happen every day. Meaning every day he's gonna show up as a mech in Seoul and he's gonna destroy parts of the city and he's gonna kill people. And the implication is that it will be her fault because she's not doing what he wants. And that leads to kind of the big ending. I'm going to save the big ending until we kind of get there to talk about, because it is something cool, like Mel said. But I thought I'd pose the question now that I've given what ended up taking a bit longer than I anticipated for the summary. But I don't know. I wanted to get your thought on kind of some of the themes in this movie and how, because I think it was you, Mel, who kind of mentioned that really the kaiju are metaphors for what's going on and they're used in really an interesting way. So I thought that would be kind of an interesting place to start. So what did y'all notice as far as themes and metaphors in this film?
Well, I think one thing that, and it was a line even that stood out to me from Oscar, Jason Sudeikis' character. And it's after they've realized that not only is she controlling the kaiju, but he's controlling the mecha. And they have kind of hinted at some things where he had kind of had a line in passing about how she had back in school had won all these writing contests and he'd never won any of them. But she's the writer, not me. I'm not interested in being a writer, something like that. And I believe it's when he's drunk and really mad at her, but he says something to her about how like she just can't accept that he has something as good as her now. And I don't think that's the actual theme, but I think for the Oscar side of the story, I would say that helps point towards the theme, which is his feeling of like smallness and being trapped. Like you get the sense that he's trapped in this life that he didn't necessarily want because his parents died, and he is probably still grieving them in some way, but also he's been forced to take over the family bar, and maybe because he didn't know what else to do, maybe because he felt an obligation to them, but either way, I mean, that's never really clarified, but he's stuck there running this bar, and he's tried to renovate the bar and modernize it, but he only had the money to renovate and modernize half, and the other half is still this like country western style bar. And I mean, there's just this pretty much, like, thinking back on it, from the moment he sees Gloria, he's almost jealous of what her life was, what she had. She escaped the small town. She lived in New York. She was working as a writer. Granted, she was unemployed for a year and basically just living off of her now ex-boyfriend. But I think a big theme is that sense of being trapped or stuck in the life that you had not planned for yourself when you were little, and your life hasn't ended up where you wanted or expected it to be. And I think that's a lot of his motivation. It certainly doesn't justify his actions, but I think that's a lot of where he's coming from.
Yeah, he seems to be taking a perverse pleasure in the fact that her life fell apart, and it angers him even more the more she starts to try to put herself back together. Like when she starts succeeding at trying to sober up, he tries to force her to drink, and it's like he definitely, there's jealousy from the very beginning. I like how you pointed out that writing contest, because it seems like it just goes by pretty quickly, but I could tell there was something wrong with him at that point. And then he and her, you can't even quite tell if they're friends, but they've known each other and they're chatting. When his friend tries to kiss her, which, I mean, there's nothing, she just got picked up by Oscar in his truck that day, and he like just loses his mind, like screaming at them. There were signs to the violence that he was capable of, I think, relatively early in the movie, but it just didn't kind of turn like it did. Every time he came to her house offering her stuff, I was creeped out, because that was like more of trying to trap her there and more of trying to let her know that she is falling apart, basically. So yeah, definitely, I can see that. I also noted the fact that she had some empathy, and he didn't really seem to. Because at first she thinks the kaiju thing is funny, and she's dancing and doing all sorts of silly things. But then when she realizes she killed the helicopter pilot, and then she trips because she's drunk and she killed a bunch of people, that plays a role in her trying to change her life. But he doesn't, I think we've mentioned this before, but he doesn't seem to care at all. And there was this one moment when they go to get the guy at the restaurant to translate her message that she's sorry into Korean so she can share that with the people in Seoul. He is totally just like laughing about how he got him to translate different things, and it's totally fine. She's worried, and she's watching the Korean man and his wife holding each other, watching the news, freaked out because of what's going on, what's happened in Seoul, and they may even know people there. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of moment that was set up, showing how like little he cared about them and how excited he was that something exciting was happening that took him out of where he was, and her perhaps having some sort of realization of the pain that she had caused. Which I realize also just sounds bizarre, because these are two white people in New England, and their problems are killing millions of people in Seoul, which is a little weird, like kind of self-absorbed, that is what it takes to get her out of alcoholism. But if we just look at the movie as a conceit, I thought it was interesting, the kind of the parallels between their two characters, but then the divergences that they take that leads to that dark turn. Also, his house was crazy. The fact that he had like scraped his mom's name off the pictures and had X's on people. I got some really scary, crazy, like Runaway Now vibes from that.
God, it looked like a semi-hoarder house too.
Yes.
They didn't really do much. They didn't explore that too much further, like why he did that. But I felt the same way when they showed the inside of his house. I was like, whoa, that's not good. That's not good at all.
Yeah. I liked the way they kind of slowly revealed his problems too in the movie, because I think in one way you could view this movie is it is almost like a feminist kaiju genre smash up, if you want to call it that. Because I think one of the themes it shows is how sometimes, like, the person who's the true villain, the person who really is capable of doing a lot of damage, often presents as like the good guy, which I think is an interesting thing that is not explored a whole lot in a lot of these kind of movies. But I was really fascinated by that, because when you first meet him, I mean, he's just picking her up on the side of the road, and she's obviously, we haven't mentioned it, but she goes into the house, her parents' house is completely empty, and she keeps falling asleep in strange places, like sitting up, leaning against the wall, or falling asleep might be the bad way. She's passed out, but or like on the floor. And so she's waking up, she's very sore. And so she goes to get a blow up mattress, like one of those, plug it into the wall, and it, inflatable mattresses. And she doesn't even have a car. So she's lugging it from the store to her parents' home, carrying this heavy package on her back. And that's when he stops and picks her up. So he almost seems like this knight in shining armor. You know, he's there like, oh, here, let me help you. And she comes off almost as the bad person, which, I mean, she has her own issues we've talked about, but in that first scene when they meet, because he's telling her about like how he owns the bar now when his dad passed away. She doesn't remember that. She asked, oh, how's your mom taking it? And he was like, you went to my mom's funeral. Like, she died when you were still here. She doesn't remember that. And so she's not coming across as this great friend at all. And I think you're right. The film doesn't really establish what their relationship is other than they grew up in the same town. But that's also, I feel like, kind of realistic, because sometimes that's the way these small towns work. Is, you know, I don't know if people are so much your friends as much as they're just the people you knew your whole life. And so that's who they are. But he seems like the good person at that point. But then it's revealed, you know, again, like Mel pointed out, you've got the guy who tries to kiss her. He loses his mind. Oscar obviously still has some, you know, hidden issues, but it keeps just kind of pulling back a little bit and showing more and more of his life, that by the time we get to that middle scene where we see his home, you do get the sense that, oh, this guy is not in any way, shape, or form okay. And the way he's behaving towards Gloria is not okay either, because everything he does is a manipulation. You know, everything he does is a subtle way of saying, I want you to be the person whose life is falling apart. Because if your life is falling apart, then my life looks better in comparison. And I need to be the one who has you and owns you and controls you. And I don't know, it was just really fascinating the way they did that. And of course, by the end, with their whole kaiju mecha fight, it's I mean, it's much more not subtle at all. You know, they're putting it out there. But I thought that was really fascinating because, you know, on one hand, it can be looked at as, oh, these kaiju are like a metaphor for their own, Mel, like you said, the white people self-absorbed problems, you know, or a metaphor for addiction and alcoholism and how that can kind of destroy a person's life. But I think on the other hand, it's this really interesting metaphor of how that quote unquote good guy can really be the one who's the danger. And I think I really liked the way they handled that because, yeah, his Jason Sudeikis did so well taking that movie from like Ted Lasso in the beginning to just complete sociopath by the end. Like whatever the opposite of Ted Lasso is, that's what he was in the end of the movie. He didn't say it, but early on, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. Gloria was watching. It was one of these times where she was watching the attacks on Seoul, and she was trying to figure it out, like what was happening. And this is when she learns that it's the same time every night. She also learns early on that it had actually happened before 25 years ago, which again lets us know that Oscar knows a whole lot more about this than she does, because he clearly remembers all of it and she doesn't. And again, it's that withholding of information from her that seems very manipulative and controlling. But it's when she's learning all this that it's the same time every day. The first time it happened was 25 years ago, and now it suddenly started happening again. And she asks a question. She says, well, is it always Seoul? And he says, yeah, it's always Seoul. And she remarks that it's sad because, and I wrote this quote down because I thought this was really interesting. She said, if the monster is only attacking Seoul, the rest of the world will stop caring. And I thought that was really kind of a profound quotation from the movie on like several different levels. Like it stuck with me because on one level, it could be talking about her and her like struggles with trying to put her life back together. You know, like she's worried because Tim already, her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, had already stopped returning her calls at that point. So maybe she was saying that kind of as a reflection of her own problems. But I think it's also kind of what Oscar, that isolation that Oscar has been experiencing, Matt, that you were talking about, is kind of summed up in that, is that, you know, if you're the only one going through these problems, eventually people are going to stop noticing and stop caring. But also, I think the fact that, you know, when something's happening in a faraway country, like talk about this like widespread devastation, but we the audience are seeing it from the point of view of just these two people in like New England. It's hard to care about what was happening in the Soul storyline because we didn't see much of it. And I felt like that was maybe intentional, but certainly like a very different feeling from watching like the first Godzilla, where it made the horrors of war seem like ever more present. And this seemed to give a very deliberate like distance from that, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's making sense at all, but that line really stood out to me.
Well, that line stood out to me too when I was watching it, and I guess one thing and this I think ties into what you're saying, and I don't know if this helps or not, but I mean, one thing that I did notice is that the movie itself is really insulated when we're in America. Like you don't see Gloria's parents. Oscar's parents are dead. I mean, you really only see Gloria and Oscar's friends, who he slowly drives away. And so it really is kind of like 4 or 5 of them, and then dwindles down to just the 2 of them, where they're kind of all that they have left. And except for the crowd scenes in Korea, that's really it. There's a few other extras that show up, but that's it as far as characters. And so, and so you're really, I mean, especially by the movie's climax, which I think we should probably get to soon, it really is just the 2 of them. And even though there are people surrounding Gloria, and I'm being deliberately vague on purpose here for a moment, but it really is just the 2 of them. And I think that insulation, I mean, I think part of that is almost even a metaphor for kind of what Oscar was doing. I mean, he was systematically driving off his friends and at the same time sort of using Gloria's guilt to tie her to him, where, I mean, he basically says multiple times that if you don't stay here with me, I'm going to come back to this park every morning at the same time and kill a bunch of people in Seoul. Like, he just doesn't care at all because he wants to use it to keep her under his thumb. And I think that works out kind of as a metaphor for what you were saying there, Lisa, about how they really, I mean, you really don't get a sense for the death and destruction that's happening in Korea. You see snippets of it, but it really does feel like at a distance, where it's almost like some sort of Greek tragedy thing where it's being reported off stage. We're like, oh, 100 people died in the kaiju attack last night, but you never see that. You just see snippets of the kaiju and the mecha in Seoul. And I guess that kind of, I'm trying to say, it ties into how insulated Oscar and Gloria become by the end of it as well. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I agree that it's kind of tied to the themes of you know, Oscar's issues with isolation, but also the abuse. Like, there's anytime you think that Gloria has an opportunity to reach out to someone and get help from Oscar, he turns it around to where she's trapped. I mean, literally at the right before the climax of the movie, I figured he had keys to her place the whole time because, he was gaslighting the whole time, which was really masterfully kind of brought up because he would say something and then later in the movie he would claim that he said something else or something else happened. So when you find out that he has complete access to her house, I mean, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until she has no option than to try to fight back. And of course, he's already threatened to physically harm her, which he does. But and I was struck by that, but I was also kind of struck by the inverse and how the movie plays with the way that we do pay attention to disasters that are far away from us. Because I felt like on the one hand, because I was like, why aren't these kids noticing what's going on in this playground? Why are these people in this house paying attention? But we kind of don't, and I think it also helped the viewer to pay more attention to them. But I was struck by the fact that people's lives became, let's say there was a kaiju attack happening somewhere in the world, or like there's a disaster or something. People became voyeurs in the movie very easily. There was live streams where people would wait and watch, and the screenwriter director played that up with the fact that, you can hear people in New England cheering when things happen. So they're disconnected because nobody knows that it's their own private drama and Gloria trying to get her life together and escape this guy. But you also have this weird, like, international connection where everybody's watching the live stream. Like, at first they think Gloria is a threat, and then they're happy because Gloria is protected, which is playing off all those kaiju moments. But everybody in all the bars paying to drink more and watch TV, like, it struck me very much as like what we just went through in 2020, like this moment when you see that history is changing and anything could be possible. And so everybody's watching CNN 24 hours a day. You have this kind of like, I don't know what it is, like 24/7 media kind of taking this on, which I think plays into what Gloria is saying is that everybody's interested in now, but if it just keeps happening there, will we still care? So yeah, I was struck by that, how people are shocked that she doesn't even know what's going on, partially because of her blackouts, but also because she isn't connected. Like, the world is so connected that they can watch what's going on in Korea on an iPad while they're doing their own private drama in the playground. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like two layers to the movie that's doing two different things. One is like showing us how we react as society to these things, these disasters in other places. As voyeurs, we want to watch it all and observe it. And then we have the private drama that's going on that we're being forced to pay attention to too. And it's stuck in my head. Like, when I think back on this movie, I think a lot about how we see the private drama working and like where you see different things and the way it was written. But I also think a lot about just all the shots of people watching TV. And at the end, it gets really interesting because Joel is watching what happens at the end of the movie on like CNN, but he knows about the private drama that happened, which no one else does. And I'm not 100% sure how to analyze that or explain all my thoughts on it, but I thought it was a nifty bit of I don't know, it was a complicated connections that were being made in what doesn't seem at first is going to be that complicated of a movie.
Yeah, it surprised me the first time I watched it, and it surprised me again the second time watching it, years later, about how complicated this movie is. I mean, really, when you kind of start digging into exactly what's going on. I feel a lot for Gloria in this movie for however I think self-absorbed she is, and for her faults, because I think number one, just watching what Oscar does to her over the course of the film, I think any character you would feel something for, because he is just nothing short of cruel to her. Mel, like you said, the gaslighting, the asserting himself into her life, giving her the job in the bar and then mocking her for it, or trying to get her to drink after she says she hasn't had a drink in so many days, showing up at her house. Oh gosh, the the furniture he delivers, which is not just delivered, but even as she rejects it and goes to his home to reject it, she still goes back and finds it there. Down to like the creepy moment of when she walks into her house and turns on the light and he's been sitting there in the dark like a serial killer. It was, I mean, he is truly kind of the monster in this movie. But I think the other thing that, like with somebody like Gloria, that I really connected with is for her own monster that she's carrying, for the issues that she has. She's trying her best to overcome them. You know, she's trying her best, like we talked about, to put her life back together and to kind of do better. Every day she wakes up trying to do better. And she even makes those attempts to think about things outside of her little bubble. Like, she really is the only one who's truly kind of concerned with what's going on in Korea at any point in the movie. As far as like their little insular group. But she is obviously trying to make a moment. So I guess, I don't know. I think we should talk about what happens in the end. Because that's really the moment, I think, where the kaiju metaphor, where they do something really cool with it. And it's a moment that I rooted for her in that, for her being such a terrible character in the beginning. By the end, I was rooting for her and I really wanted her to destroy Oscar's character. Because basically what happens is they end up having a second fight, kind of a second showdown in their park. And I wrote down that their final fight seems really brutal, because that's when he says, every morning you aren't here if this will happen. And he starts stomping around. Of course, the implication is that his robot mecha is killing people. And it feels like a very hopeless moment. And it's him at his cruelest, I think. And it also seems brutal just by the fact that you're watching a very human woman fight a human man at that point. And you feel, I think, her powerlessness, because when he like pushes her or hits her or harms her, at one point, I think he chokes her. Like it feels very real. This isn't a superhero moment. You know what I mean? But she does something very genius, I think. She gets on an airplane. We assume she's heading back to New York to kind of just get on with her life and hope that Oscar does the same, except she doesn't. She gets on an airplane and she goes to Seoul, because she figures, if I'm standing in my hometown in the park, but my kaiju appears in Korea, maybe if I'm standing in Korea, my kaiju will appear in my hometown park. And it does. And she's able to learn to control that monster within her and use it to pretty much scare the living daylights out of Ted Lasso. And she picks him up, and it's this wonderful moment. I think he plays up, Jason Sudeikis does really great in that scene. I don't know, Mel, I know you in particular really liked that scene, so I don't want to say too much. I don't know, you want to share?
Sure. I mean, I really enjoyed the end. I hate to say it, I enjoy someone else's pain, but I mean, we just saw him beat her up, and like you said, it's a very brutal scene. That was one of those moments in the movie that was darker than I had expected going in. And I mean, he's threatened this and talked about doing this to other people as well, but like you said, he's hurting her at that point. And yeah, he runs away from her. She catches him anyway and is holding him, and you have this kind of classic creature moment where the monster's screaming in his face. And, as like a lot of bullies are, because we know he's been a bully since they were in elementary school. That's what started this whole thing, is he was jealous of the project that she did in school and destroyed it. He's crying and sobbing and going on about how she needs to take pity on him. And then, of course, as you know, his true colors come out, and he just basically screams at her, insulting her that she should let him down, and like commanding her. And she just throws him like as far as she can, which, since she's a kaiju, I mean, at the end of the movie, you don't ever see him like hit the ground. He's still flying. And so you have this wonderful kind of, I guess, like feminist revenge moment, which I believe was earned with all his cruelty, psychological, emotional, and physical throughout the movie. But you also get to see, finally, you get to be in Seoul and see the people who have been going through all of this. They don't understand exactly what's going on, but they see the robot thrown away. And again, the monster seems like kind of a champion for them, that it protected them, the kaiju. And I love the end where she goes to the bar and offers to tell the bartender what happened. And the bartender asks her if she wants a drink. And she's just like, because she's been trying so hard not to drink. So I hope at the end that she doesn't get a drink and that she just tells the story and that she goes on with her life, because you really, in the last 10 minutes of the story, or the last 10 minutes of the movie, she makes a lot of good decisions. She's not going to go back to her ex-boyfriend because she realizes that also was problematic. She's definitely going to take care of Oscar. And I feel like she's kind of getting her life together. So in my mind, she really did take Oscar out. It's done. There's no more of that. And she can kind of move on with getting her life back together. I felt like she was a very likable character. I always had empathy for her. Starts out in a mess and gradually, slowly, you kind of root for her to get out of it. And it's all dependent on her using her monster powers, I guess, for good. I don't know how else to say it, but in order to stop this bully, basically, who is using his monster powers to be a true monster, like you said, like he is the monster of the piece. It's not necessarily the robot or the kaiju or her; it's him.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that idea of she uses like her monster powers for good, whereas he's obviously using them for evil. I don't know. I like films like this that kind of, she doesn't get rid of her monster. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is that she, as you said, learns to make good decisions and make good choices, and she learns to use that strength and that power in a different way. And I guess we're going to, if the movie continued on, we would learn that she is going to continue to learn to live with the monster within her, which, I don't know, in that way it kind of reminds me of something like the Babadook or something like that. Where the point isn't to overcome the monster, the point is to learn to live with the monster and to kind of coexist and everybody be good. But I agree, I had empathy for her and I rooted for her. And you know what, I hope a lot of people will watch this film, because I think a lot of people didn't. I don't remember hearing a whole lot about it, and I like it. I think it's a really nice update on the kaiju tradition. Well, we are coming up on an hour, so I think this is a really good place for us to kind of call this discussion on Colossal. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. And I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode. If you've watched the movie, or maybe if you're gonna, go out and watch the movie now that we've talked about it, we'd love to know about it. You can reach out to us on social media. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. And we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we are doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We're having a lot of fun over on Patreon. You'll get access to exclusive content, so you'll get extra episodes by signing up for that. Or if you can't, that is fine too. You can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free for you, but it does help other listeners find us. Our theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.